Imagine staring at a balance sheet where launching a massive rocket to Mars is like highly profitable, but running a social media platform is just bleeding you dry.
Yeah, it's quite the contrast.
Right. Today, we are looking at the ultimate corporate identity crisis. We are exploring this really fascinating stack of questions and notes that map out what happens when traditional ground-based infrastructure goes head-to-head with, well, extraterrestrial internet ambitions.
Which is a huge undertaking.
Totally. We're diving into SpaceX, but we are looking way past the rockets you normally see on the news. We are unpacking the technological, financial, and strategic crosswinds facing the company as it pushes into the cellular market, all while navigating the immense, honestly unforgiving pressure of its newly public status.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because for you, the listener, the days of looking down at your phone and seeing 0 bars the second you step behind a moderately thick pine tree well, those days might be ending. But the corporate drama behind replacing those cell towers is really just getting started.
And that tension is, it's the true gravity of this entire situation.
Yeah.
The material we are synthesizing today goes far beyond just fixing your dead zones on a rural highway. We are analyzing a massive paradigm shift.
Absolutely.
We're witnessing the very real and incredibly messy collision between wild, unrestrained innovation and Wall Street's absolute demand for quarterly profits.
But before we get into all the boardroom drama, we kind of have to grasp the actual physics of the problem, right?
Definitely.
Because for decades, the baseline technology has been the traditional cell tower. Those towers are entirely geographical.
Yeah.
You lease a square of land, you put up a metal pole, you attach antennas, and you run fiber optic cables deep into the ground to connect it to the broader internet backbone.
Yeah, they operate on a very localized line-of-sight principle.
Yeah.
And that terrestrial nature is their fundamental limitation. The Earth is curved, mountains exist.
Concrete buildings.
Exactly. Concrete gets in the way and blocks signals. If geography gets in the way, the only solution is to build another physical tower.
Which means more leases.
Right. You negotiate another land lease, you dig more trenches for cables. It is an infrastructure model that is permanently bound by dirt and physical obstacles.
Which brings us to the proposed solution, which is basically bypassing the dirt entirely. The concept SpaceX is pushing isn't just about launching satellites. It's about shifting the entire infrastructure from the ground to low Earth orbit.
Yes.
But visualizing how this works is tricky, though. I used to think of it like hovering a giant megaphone from a helicopter. You just blast the signal down from space and everybody hears it.
Right.
But looking at the technical breakdowns in our sources, a megaphone is a terrible way to understand this.
It is, because a megaphone is a one-way street.
Okay.
That analogy only accounts for the downlink, the satellite shouting down to your phone. But cellular data is a two-way conversation.
Oh, right.
You have to shout back to request the data. That is the uplink.
And that is the massive aha moment for me. If we use a better analogy, think of traditional cell towers like playing a game of Marco Polo where everyone has to be in the exact same swimming pool.
Okay, I like that.
But with SpaceX, it's like trying to hold a conversation in a massive, crowded, incredibly loud stadium. The satellite is the stadium announcer. They have massive, powerful speakers and an unlimited power supply. They can talk to everyone in the stadium at once.
Easily.
Right, so when you download a webpage, that's the announcer talking to you. No problem at all.
But the insurmountable issue arises when you try to send a text message or upload a photo.
Exactly, because you are trying to whisper a request from the nosebleed seats back down to the announcer.
Yes.
Your cell phone battery, it's tiny. It operates on just a few watts of power. It doesn't have a giant satellite dish attached to it.
No, of course not.
It just has this microscopic internal antenna designed to talk to a metal pole maybe 3 miles away. Now, you are asking that tiny battery to scream a signal 300 miles straight up through the atmosphere, through clouds and weather, to a satellite that is flying overhead at 17,000 miles per hour. The physics of that whisper are just staggering.
And that is the true technological bottleneck. What's fascinating here is that bypassing terrestrial towers entirely shifts the math problem.
How so?
The challenge is no longer physical geography. It is raw data traffic capacity and signal sensitivity in orbit.
Right.
A single satellite isn't just listening for the guy behind the pine tree. Its footprint covers an area the size of a medium European country. You are potentially connecting millions of phones simultaneously.
Which brings up the sheer capacity challenge. Streaming a 4K video directly from space to a phone is light years harder than than sending a simple text message.
Absolutely.
Like if a traditional cell tower gets overloaded during a massive music festival, the telecom company can just roll out a temporary mobile cell tower on a truck to handle the density.
Yeah. Right, they do that all the time.
Yeah, you slice the geographic pie into smaller, more manageable pieces.
But you cannot roll a temporary truck into low Earth orbit.
No.
The physics of bandwidth are unforgiving. Every satellite has a maximum throughput. If 1 million people in that massive footprint suddenly try to stream high-definition video, the satellite's capacity is severely tested.
So what's the workaround?
To handle everyday data demands, the math requires constantly launching newer, heavier, higher-capacity satellites equipped with incredibly sensitive phased array antennas.
Okay, phased array.
Yeah, instead of a physical dish moving around, these arrays use hundreds of tiny antennas that electronically steer the signal just to have a chance at hearing those millions of tiny whispers coming from the ground.
Okay, so assuming they crack the physics of the whisper and they have the tech to beam data directly to cellular phones at scale, it sets up an incredible strategic dilemma.
It really does.
We are looking at a scenario where a space company can suddenly do what a legacy telecom giant does, but without paying rent for 100,000 cell tower plots. The natural next question from the notes is, do you cooperate with the current cellular giants, or do you try to crush them?
Well, challenging terrestrial giants outright means adopting their biggest headache, which is the consumer.
Oh, yeah.
Think about the friction of customer acquisition in the telecom space. I mean, consider your own phone habits as a listener. The volatility is immense.
And people switch carriers constantly.
Exactly. They do it for a cheaper monthly rate, for a free phone upgrade, or simply because they had a terrible interaction with the customer service rep.
It's an entire industry built on churn. You need massive call centers, billing departments, aggressive marketing teams, and physical retail stores in every strip mall in America.
Yes.
Launching rockets is highly complex, obviously, but managing fickle, carrier-hopping consumers requires a completely different type of grueling, unglamorous corporate infrastructure.
And that introduces the hardware risk. Traditional cellular companies often have deep, intertwined relationships with phone manufacturers.
Right.
Sometimes they even subsidize the hardware, eating the cost of the device to lock you into a multi-year contract. If a space company decides to challenge the telecoms directly, they might be forced to enter the hardware market themselves to guarantee their specialized satellite connection works perfectly.
Wait, here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I have to push back on this logic from the sources. Why would a space company want to take on the massive risk of manufacturing physical pocket rectangles?
That's a very fair question.
I mean, the smartphone market has razor-thin margins and insane supply chain vulnerabilities. Why go through the nightmare of competing with entrenched consumer tech giants like Apple or Samsung when you could just be the invisible pipeline powering the phones we already own?
And that's why partnering with existing telecoms is arguably the far more elegant solution. You act as the invisible backbone. As a listener, you keep your current carrier. But the moment you drive out of range of that terrestrial tower, your phone seamlessly connects to the satellite.
Just automatically.
Automatically. The space company gets paid a massive wholesale contract by the telecom giant, and they completely avoid dealing with someone yelling at a call center because their screen cracked.
But being the invisible pipeline means sharing the revenue, though.
Yeah.
And a massive shift recently occurred that dictates exactly how much revenue this company needs.
The IPO.
Exactly. They went through an IPO. They are now a publicly traded entity. And with that transition comes an enormous amount of corporate baggage.
Going public fundamentally alters the DNA of an organization.
Yeah.
When you are a privately held entity, you answer to a very small, select group of investors who generally share your long-term visionary goals.
They buy into the dream.
Exactly. But the moment you ring that IPO bell, you open your books to the entire world, and you suddenly answer to the relentless scrutiny of the public market.
And those first public books were apparently quite a shock to the system. The breakdown specifically highlights the shadow of XAI and the acquisition of Twitter dragging down the overarching financials, which is wild. I was trying to figure out how a social media platform hurts a space company's earnings.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really comes down to corporate conglomeration and the perception of risk.
Okay.
While they might be legally distinct entities in the eyes of institutional investors, they are inextricably linked under the umbrella of a single founder's ecosystem.
Oh, I see.
They often share overlapping private investors, resources, and leadership bandwidth. So when the market looks at the balance sheet and sees a highly successful revolutionary rocket and satellite division intrinsically tied to a social media acquisition that is bleeding cash and showing zero gain,
It drags everything down.
it creates a massive drag on the stock price. Wall Street absolutely loathes inefficiency and unpredictable liabilities.
So the overarching strategic question becomes whether the space business will have to formally sever ties or spin off those other entities just to protect its own valuation from that financial anchor.
Right.
But looking at how they plan to raise the massive capital needed for their next phase, there was a fascinating mechanical shift in the stock itself.
The options.
Yeah, stock options. Specifically, the push to open up daily expiring stock options.
So what does this all mean for their wallet? For anyone who isn't a day trader, what does it mean to have options that expire daily, and why would a space company even care?
Well, financial derivatives are just tools, but daily options, often called 0 days to expiration, or 0 GTE options, are a very specific kind of tool.
Okay.
Because they expire the same day they are traded, the price of the option swings wildly based on tiny movements in the underlying stock.
Oh, wow.
They're incredibly cheap to buy, highly volatile, and they allow for massive trading volume. It basically turns the stock market into something closely resembling a casino for retail speculators. So you can essentially place a highly leveraged bet on whether the stock will go up or down by the time the closing bell rings that exact same day.
Precisely. And when millions of retail traders make those daily bets, it creates a massive surge of liquidity and premium in the market. The stock price can inflate rapidly based on sheer momentum rather than underlying fundamentals.
Like a meme stock.
Exactly like that. If a company can tap into that retail speculation frenzy, capturing that meme stock energy, they can raise an extraordinary amount of capital in a very short window.
So they use it.
The extreme volatility essentially becomes a backdoor mechanism to crowdfund their most ambitious projects.
I mean, we're talking about funding a moon-based server. You don't just walk in and get a traditional bank loan to put a data center on a lunar crater. You need the kind of wild, irrational cash flow that only millions of day traders can provide.
Developing interplanetary infrastructure is arguably the most capital-intensive endeavor in human history. But this circles back to the burden of the social media division dragging down the public earnings. It forces a brutal reality check on an executive team used to operating with private impunity.
Right.
You simply cannot crowdfund a moon base through retail hype if your core institutional investors are fleeing because your peripheral ventures are hemorrhaging money.
It is a spectacular clash of two worlds. You have the Wild West of crowdfunding a sci-fi future, slamming headfirst into the stiff-collar reality of quarterly earnings calls.
It's a huge shift.
That intense pressure forces a critical choice regarding where the company allocates its time, its brilliant engineers, and its capital. Do you build practical things that generate massive cash flow right now, or do you build things for the history books?
This is the tension between pure pragmatism and sci-fi ambitions.
Yeah.
On the pragmatic side, you have the deployment of V3 GBP's internet. We aren't talking about the standard satellite internet that gives a rural cabin access to email.
Yo.
V3 GBPs represents ultra-high-speed, massive capacity data pipes specifically targeted at major enterprise clients.
Business to business. Selling internet to a massive cruise ship, a fleet of commercial airlines, or an international shipping conglomerate is a totally different ballgame than selling it to a million individuals.
Completely different.
The contracts are massive, the clients are reliable, and they are willing to pay top dollar for dedicated bandwidth over the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's like a startup deciding whether to build a highly profitable delivery van for airlines and trains, or pouring all that cash into building a teleportation device on the moon.
And the teleportation device in this context being the push for lunar infrastructure and space-floating XAI servers.
Wait, I need to stop here because space-floating servers sounds like something out of a comic book. Why on Earth, or rather off-Earth, would you want to put a massive computer server farm into orbit or on the moon? What is the practical point of doing that?
It solves two incredibly complex real-world problems: data sovereignty and thermodynamics.
Okay, lay it on me.
Let's start with data sovereignty. When a server sits in a data center in a specific country, it is bound by the laws, regulations, and potential censorship or surveillance of that country's government.
Right.
A server floating in international orbit or sitting on the moon exists outside standard terrestrial jurisdictions. It is the ultimate offshore data haven.
Okay, that is wild to think about. But what about the thermodynamics? Why does that matter?
Well, artificial intelligence, specifically training models like XAI, requires immense computational power. Terrestrial data centers generate so much heat that they consume millions of gallons of fresh water and massive amounts of electricity just for cooling systems.
Oh, because servers run so hot.
Exactly. But space is a vacuum, and parts of the moon are incredibly cold. If you can solve the engineering challenges of cosmic radiation, you suddenly have an environment where cooling is naturally abundant, powered directly by unhindered solar arrays.
The engineering challenge is the catch, though.
Yeah.
You cannot just buy a rack of servers from an electronics store, strap them to a rocket, and blast them into the vacuum of space.
Definitely not.
They would be destroyed by radiation in a week. They need to be radiation-hardened, incredibly power-efficient, and capable of autonomous repair, because you can't just send a technician up there to swap out a bad hard drive.
Which forces the company into another major strategic pivot, which is manufacturing. To achieve those sci-fi goals, they cannot rely on standard consumer tech supply chains. They have to focus on making their own proprietary chips and highly specialized computer parts.
Wait, really? This makes perfect sense now. If they pivot away from fighting a brutal ground war against Verizon or AT&T over the consumer cellular market, and instead pour those billions into semiconductor manufacturing, they gain total control over their own destiny.
Exactly.
They aren't waiting on a backlog factory in Taiwan to build the internal components for their moon servers.
Vertical integration becomes the hidden bridge between the practical and the ambitious. The exact same custom, high-efficiency, radiation-tolerant chips needed to make the highly profitable V3 GBP's internet work seamlessly for a commercial airline flying through the upper atmosphere. Those are the foundational building blocks for a space-floating XAI server.
Oh, wow.
By controlling the silicon, they develop hyper-specialized technology that the standard terrestrial market simply has no financial incentive to produce.
But designing and fabricating custom silicon takes years and billions of dollars in research and development, and this pulls us right back to the ultimate tug-of-war we established at the beginning. Profit versus innovation.
Yes, it does.
Because this company is now public. They have an IPO. They must answer to board members, institutional shareholders, and incredibly powerful stakeholders like banks and hedge funds.
And this raises an important question for you as the listener. Why does this boardroom drama matter? Because the fiduciary duty of a hedge fund manager is to maximize financial returns for their clients. Their mandate is not to colonize the moon, advance human consciousness, or build orbital data havens. They operate on strict quarterly timelines, not multi-decade interplanetary roadmaps.
I am genuinely stuck on this IPO logic. I am trying to work this out in real time. Wait, isn't the whole point of an IPO to get the massive pile of cash needed to build the moon base?
That's the theory.
But Wall Street doesn't care about a moon base. Wall Street cares about 90-day profit windows and stock buybacks. Didn't the leadership just hand the steering wheel over to the exact people who will kill those sci-fi dreams? If the people handing you that cash only care about next quarter's profit margins, aren't you just trapping yourself?
That is the paradox of public capital. When a company is private, a visionary founder can walk into a boardroom and say, we are going to intentionally burn billions of dollars and lose money for the next 10 years because we are building a city on Mars.
And people just nod.
As long as that small group of private backers agrees, they have the freedom to execute that vision.
They have the runway to fail, to experiment, and just push boundaries without someone breathing down their neck every 3 months.
Well, once you are public, that runway vanishes. If an executive intentionally loses money for 10 years on a highly speculative space project, the institutional shareholders will file a massive lawsuit against the board of directors for breaching their fiduciary duty.
Thanks.
They will demand the removal of the CEO, they will force the company to liquidate its visionary assets, halt the research, and mandate a dividend payment to the shareholders.
So they will legally force the company to stop building moon servers, scrap the direct-to-cell phone revolution entirely, and just sell more of that safe, boring V3 internet to cruise ships because the profit margin is guaranteed.
The battle between visionary break things and rebuild them innovation and the strict fiduciary duty to institutional wealth will ultimately dictate the future of this technology.
It's crazy.
The tools that actually reach your hands or the servers that process your data in orbit are dictated not by what is physically or scientifically possible, but by what is financially viable to a shareholder looking at a quarterly spreadsheet. The market demands steady, predictable profit.
It is wild to step back and look at the sheer scale of what we just unpacked. We started this deep dive trying to figure out how to get a single bar of signal in a dead zone. Just try and send a basic text message from behind a pine tree.
And we went quite a bit further.
Yeah, we ended up mapping out the physics of space-to-Earth whispers, the massive burden of a social media platform on a balance sheet, and the reality of hedge funds potentially shutting down a moon base just to satisfy a 90-day earnings report.
It perfectly illustrates how physical infrastructure, cutting-edge technology, and the mechanisms of global finance are entirely inseparable. You simply cannot understand the future of human communication without understanding the complex machinery of capital that funds it.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final thought to mull over. Something that takes all these moving parts and flips the traditional narrative completely upside down.
Right. Consider the long-term trajectory here. If a newly public, highly revolutionary space company is eventually forced by immense hedge fund pressure to prioritize safe, quarterly profits over its wild innovations, could we see the ultimate irony unfold?
Oh, man.
Could the boring legacy terrestrial telecom companies, suddenly freed from the massive financial burden of maintaining tens of thousands of physical cell towers and flush with unexpected cash, actually become the long-term innovators of the next decade?
That would be wild.
Meanwhile, the revolutionary space company gradually morphs into just another rigid, bureaucratic, dividend-paying utility provider in the sky.
The ultimate corporate role reversal. The trailblazing space company becoming the new, boring utility company. That is absolutely something to think about the next time you look down at your phone and wonder where your signal's coming from. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible infrastructure around you, keep looking up, and we'll catch you next time.